You're listening to Culturally Speaking. This is Janice.
And this is Neha, and we're here to talk about all things cultural. Okay, so today we have Dr. Anne Whitehouse joining us, and Janice and I are really excited to chat to you, actually, because we obviously got a chance to read your book, and we've had obviously a chat previously, but I guess for anyone listening, how would you describe what you do today, and I guess your background to how you got there as well?
Goodness me. Well, it's lovely to be here because I love sharing this story because so many women have been through a similar version, and it's so important that people understand that this is a common experience. I wasn't a freak. This was very, very common. Okay, so I was what you would call a high-flying academic scientist. I went to Cambridge, PhD, postdoctoral research fellowship, and then I got what I believed was my dream job, which was lecturer in mechanics of materials at an engineering department. And off I went with my aspiration to succeed as a scientist and to prove that women could do anything the men can do and better, and being feminine as well, because I was very feminine. I would wear long silk skirts. I had hair down to my waist, dangly earrings, makeup. There I was in these mechanical engineering labs. And well, unfortunately, it didn't turn out as I had hoped. When I got basically into that department, it was as if the rug had just been pulled out from under me, and I didn't understand why. So obviously, there was some challenges with being such a minority, but nothing to explain the reaction that I had. And what happened was that my stress just hit the roof. My confidence evaporated. I never felt good enough, no matter what I did. And I pushed myself harder and harder and harder. Nothing ever seemed to make me feel better. And of course, this is with me having great feedback from my students. I was publishing in peer-reviewed journals. I was speaking at international conferences. There was nothing wrong with my work at all. And yet I just felt intrinsically just, not good enough. And I sort of shut down. I wasn't able to open my mouth really and, command the room when I needed to. And I didn't understand this. I just pushed myself harder and harder. And what happened was that I went into what I now call a spectacular burnout, and I ended up with chronic fatigue syndrome. And after just 6 years, I'd lost my scientific career and I'd lost my health as well. So that it was not the journey that I had planned at all. Nowadays, you would definitely have said that I had imposter syndrome, but we're talking about 1996. No one had heard of imposter syndrome back then. But looking back, that's exactly what was going on. So what I did, instead of giving up, because the conventional medicine, the consultant told me he could do nothing for me, I instead decided that I wasn't going to accept that my life was over when I was only 30 years old. So I literally went on a journey into the subconscious mind to find out what on earth had happened. Why had I reacted in this really extreme, out of proportion way in a job where I was completely capable? So that then took me to discover what my mind believed on those hidden levels. And what I discovered was absolutely astonishing. And that was that even though I had been brought up with complete equal opportunities and had every encouragement to have a career in a male-dominated environment, nobody ever held me back in that way. My subconscious was holding a whole load of programs, beliefs, which were deeply rooted in the patriarchal past. So basically, when I had gone into that engineering environment, my mind had triggered a whole load of messages saying what you're doing is forbidden. You're not allowed to be a scientist. You're certainly not allowed to have a PhD. You're not allowed to have authority over men, etc., etc. And it was triggering this enormous stress because my subconscious believed I was in danger. So that explained what had happened to me. But by this time, I didn't even want to go back to science. By this time, I thought, my goodness, this is phenomenal. This is a really important thing. And I was already working with other women. And the thing that is so illuminating is that it wasn't just me. every single person I tested, and we are literally talking about hundreds over 2 decades, had exactly the same thing. And I've worked with women who are in law, finance, IT, academia, politics, entrepreneurs, business owners, you name it, I've worked with them. Any woman who is pushing the boundaries and really succeeding out in the world, we've all got this, what I call this hidden archaic operating system undermining us. So if you think about it, we have a mismatch between what we believe consciously, our rights, our qualifications, and this subtle whispering of you're not allowed to be here under the surface. And that mismatch, that inner conflict, is then going to create a whole load of reactions, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. That was quite a long introduction.
I think, yeah, that when we first spoke, I think that resonated a lot with myself and Neha, especially in our fields in technology as well, where,
exactly.
There is a lot of work being done around STEM, at school, and really encouraging sort of gender equality in these traditionally male-dominated industries. But I think what was really interesting for me in particular was how you said you just felt you were not good enough. And it doesn't even have to be work-related. I think there is a tendency just for women to feel that we are not good enough. It could be, people who reach a certain age and are still not married or have kids, and then they think, oh no, maybe I should have done that 10 years ago. Or it could be, I don't know, even on attractiveness, on those kinds of things. So in your research and in your experience, why do you think that is, that women just feel like they're not good enough?
Oh, right. Well, okay, now we're getting onto the exciting stuff. So we decide whether we are good enough by what our subconscious tells us. So, and it is using a particular benchmark, and we don't know what it's measuring us against. So if our subconscious were measuring us against our own capabilities and our own freedom and our own qualifications and how much we have achieved, it would say you are absolutely good enough. But its benchmark, and I'm glad you flagged up these other issues because they are all in there as well, totally in there as well. It's got the benchmark is that a good, in inverted commas, good, respectable woman is going to be in the home. She's going to be a mother. She's going to be cooking. She's going to be keeping a low profile and supporting her husband in his aspirations in the world. And in all of that, it's not only about our occupation, it's about the fact that women have been forever judged by their bodies, their fertility, not their minds and their achievement. So, if we are not ticking those benchmarks, if we've had a fantastic high-powered career, we have broken all the rules that say this is only for men. We are in our 40s, we're unmarried, we haven't had children. Basically, the subconscious says, well, you have completely failed as a woman because you should have been married by 18 and had 5 babies by the time you were 26. That's what the subconscious is saying. And it's saying that by going out in the world and having an amazing career, you are being really, your behavior is inappropriate. It's forbidden and very likely you'll be punished for it. Now, we don't know that. We just get the emotional message. So what it does, it triggers, you're in danger. You've done the wrong thing. You've failed because you're not ticking the right boxes. And so what that does is that switches on like a fight or flight deep inside our subconscious mind, which then triggers the feelings of stress. And how the stress manifests obviously depends on your own character and how you react to things. But it might be being anxious before, for example, a presentation or a meeting. It might be you can't speak up in that meeting. It might be that you feel you're under attack and you have to get really aggressive. It depends. But what you will think, you have the facts in front of you. You have the feeling of that fight or flight. And the conclusion we are bound to make is, I feel anxious because I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Not, I feel anxious because I'm forbidden for being here. So don't you see, we don't have enough information to make the right conclusion. So once we've begun to believe we're not good enough, then think, my goodness, I've got to try harder. I've got to push myself harder. I've got to work longer hours. I've got to do this, that, and the other. But it's not going to work because we're never going to tick the boxes that the subconscious has, because it's still saying, well, come on, Anne, you should be back in that kitchen, right? And I want to really emphasize that, there's no way on earth that my conscious mind believed those things, and that I believed that my mind had those inside me, because it was so not my upbringing. My environment had never said that. I'd had odd things. We can talk about those, but if you've got time. But the point is, I was astonished when I found that this subconscious operating system was there. And the thing is that when you begin to understand what's happening, it actually makes perfect sense, because we have gone millennia with women being disempowered, and it doesn't matter what country you're from, what culture you're from, it's the same. So in the UK, 1918, first women to ever get the vote, and even then, in the 1960s, so much was still not there. And when you begin to look at when the law changed for the equality of women, it's really, it's like, it's well into my adulthood. In the 1980s, it's like, what? So the point is that for all these millennia, the programs that were repeated over and over again, society, the norm, the benchmarks were that women were not allowed to outshine men. They were not allowed to do a whole lot of things. Then society has changed on the surface through, with law and policies in a matter of literally 2 generations. And that's simply not enough time for these subtle levels to change. So, you and I, you two are somewhat younger than I am, but we are in our prime. We're here at this cusp of this transition where we actually have the freedom, but we don't have the support, the energetic support.
You don't hear people talk about a bachelorette pad, right? It's not a cool thing to be a bachelorette, but it's definitely, someone could be a silver fox in their 60s and be a bachelor, and that's still cool.
Oh yes, that's another. How many hours have we got to talk? A complete another angle of it, and that is this double standard. The different benchmarks that are set for men and women. I mean, I've been talking about the subconscious ones, but there are all the conscious ones as well. All of this, men get more distinguished as they get old. We just get old and obsolete, right? And so the word I wouldn't say bachelorette. I would say spinster, because that's the official word, and that's really derogatory.
Yeah,
because it's derogatory because a woman should be married, because then she can be respectable and be in the kitchen, look after her children, right? It's archaic, but there it is. And it's the same thing where you have a situation where a woman and a man behave exactly the same way, say exactly the same things. A man, oh, he's a leader. A woman, oh, she's arrogant, she's a bitch. Exactly the same behavior, but the standard for each of us is different, and that is a really conscious manifestation of these hidden benchmarks, this operating system that's undermining women all the time.
And the first thing you said there was, our minds measure us against something that we are not conscious of ourselves. Yes. I found very, very interesting, because quite often a lot of in the last, I'd say 5-10 years, there have been a plethora of women in very high power positions who have come out and said, try this, do this, I did this. And those are all really great strategies and tactics to perhaps help you in a situation. But if at the end of it, as you say, your mind and your subconscious is still going to tell you you're not good enough, it kind of feels like you're just plastering over the cracks of the problem.
That's exactly it. And it can even get worse. So the conventional wisdom on empowerment would be things like, fake it till you make it, push yourself out of your comfort zone, use this assertive body language, lower the tone of your voice a bit to sound a bit more masculine, right? All of that, it's even less than plastering over the cracks. And there's the thing is that, firstly, if you are doing that, you are still feeling the way that you're feeling. You are totally feeling all of those things, that anxiety, that stress, that not being able to speak up, the frustration, all of it, you're feeling it. And that is what creates the personal cost, because that amount of stress, that amount of inner conflict over, in my case, years, it doesn't get better, it gets worse. You have to keep on dealing with it every single day. And then we have the added thing that if your mind believes you are in danger, which it absolutely does when you test it, and when I say danger, it's not that you feel, oh, you might get into a bit of trouble. If you actually test it, your mind is saying, you're going to be put to death for this. You're going to be executed. You're going to be burnt at the stake. It's way, way, way out of proportion from what you might think it is. But of course, historically, powerful women have very often been, really persecuted and put to death. And again, all over the world. So imagine you're in your career and you've been told to push yourself out of your comfort zone and just do it anyway, feel the fear and do it and fake it and all of those things. So you do. And you do succeed. You get your promotions, you go forward in your career. Meanwhile, your subconscious begins to completely freak out because it's been saying from day one, you shouldn't be doing this. You're in danger. You've got to stop. You've got to stop. Trigger all the danger signs. But you're ignoring it. You're pushing forwards, being a 21st century professional woman. And the longer you do it, the more scared the subconscious gets. And when you get promotion, you get more authority, you're going in further and further into that forbidden territory. So what you find is that the stress gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why you get to a certain point in your career and something is going to break. It may have been a bit of stress initially, but by the time you've gone up several rungs of the ladder in your profession and you've been holding that amount of stress for a number of years, you simply can't sustain that. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I've met other women who, they've even got as far as the board level in companies, and then the burnout strikes and they can't cope with the toxic environment. And it's because they've stretched this subconscious thing so far, and eventually it says, enough, you're not staying another moment in this career, and it will explode in one way or another. It can be your health, it can be your relationships, it can be your mental health, it can be the whole thing. So pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself when underneath you are not supported by the subconscious is actually a recipe for disaster. And that's why this pattern of high achieving women who then burn out happens again and again and again. And, I'd have hoped that things would be better now than it happened to me 25 years ago. But I get women contacting me all the time, young women with exactly the same pattern, because they're getting the same messages, they're still pushing forwards, and the same thing is just happening and undermining us.
As we were going through your book, I think there's something in there that you said that women are hardwired to give their power away and go into submission. And I wrote a question to you. I was saying, but are women conscious that they're giving away this power? And you said to me, very accurately, it's not a conscious submission, it's an unconscious submission. I think it's right. So important to say that.
It's so important, and this is the whole problem. If we were consciously submissive, we wouldn't be in these situations, because we would not be having these careers. We would not be being empowered professional women at all. So this is it, this giving your power away. Let's just talk about that for a second. So there are women who believe that they are empowered and confident because they are going through their careers and they are succeeding and they are achieving. But I would tell them, well, actually, you're not empowered. You are being forceful on the surface when you need to be, but underneath, you're not empowered because your subconscious believes you shouldn't be there and is doing everything it can to undermine you. And that makes your subconscious trigger this fight or flight, which you get locked into. And that's what I describe as subconscious submission. This your subconscious giving your power away. And that's an energetic thing, which is really the key to getting out of it, is to understand that it's a real energy flow that goes on under the surface. But we've got this the subconscious doing this thing, giving the power away. And even when you're being forceful on the surface, you can tell if you have given that power away. So you can tell if your subconscious has done the submission thing while you're busy giving your presentation or your pitch or whatever it is that you're doing. And that's by looking for key symptoms.
Please. That's going to be my next question, because I'm sure if there's a woman out there that's listening thinking, how on earth do I know if I've done that?
Yeah, so you can go two ways, or maybe three. Either it's if you've gone into the flight, which is what my subconscious did. If you're like that, then you will find that you feel more anxious, more adrenaline, more stress than logically there should be for what you're doing. Obviously, there's always a little bit if you've got a performance of some sort, but if it's way out of proportion, that's definitely a sign. And I actually used to say to people that I felt as if I was going to my execution, just going into work. I actually said it. I didn't realize my mind believed it, but that was there. So that's the first thing. If you find yourself sort of shrinking into the background and feeling invisible, that's another sign. If you want to speak up and you find you can't open your mouth, or you're really worried about saying something, or if somebody talks over you or interrupts you in a meeting and you just can't get the ball back, that is a very, very key sign. In fact, that's something that is so critical for women to be able to manage energetically in order to progress their careers without that really exploding. That's actually the basis of the whole training that I now do to deal with that Achilles heel. If you find that you have sleep problems, that's a very, very key sign. I stopped sleeping for literally, weeks at a time. I'd be signed off on tranquilizers to literally knock me out for a couple of days. I didn't listen to the warning signs. I went straight back to work again. My body was saying, you must not be in this environment. You have to get out. And I didn't listen. Things like stress, headaches, migraines, IBS is a very key symptom as well. So if you're in that kind of camp, then that is a sign that your subconscious is spending a lot of time in fight or flight and believes you're in danger. Then you've got the other side of the coin. And I know this relates to something we were going to talk about as well, other women. The other side of the coin is the woman who goes into fight. Now, these women usually think they're super empowered. They call themselves the badass type, and they think that they are very successful and very empowered. But what they've actually done, their subconscious has gone into fight, and they've taken on all the messages that the female way is not good enough, inferior and forbidden, and they've taken on the aggressive male energy instead. So what they do is they become confrontational and aggressive and very forceful on the surface, but they're still running on empty underneath. So they usually get ahead more than the quieter type, like I was, but because they're still running on empty, they will still eventually start to burn out. And because everything in them has labelled the female as weak, because they had to shut down those parts of themselves to succeed, any woman who's in the other camp, they will tend to be very disparaging, very aggressive, and put down a woman who is quieter and has gone the other way, not understanding that you're both disempowered. You've both had to shut down parts of yourselves to try and succeed in that environment. But the other kind, she's just gone into this fight, taken on the male energy, and then decided that female is just weak, full stop, and then attacks other women. And you can guarantee that in any environment where you have got women who are achieving, pushing forward, breaking the barriers, there are going to be two types of women. There's the one who's very aggressive and taken on the male energy and thinks she's super empowered. And there's going to be the quieter type who struggles to speak up, is a bit in the background, even though she's probably brilliant, and suffers all the anxiety and the stress. And you see it again and again and again. And this is why.
I'm nodding, and I know you can't sort of see what I say if you're listening, but the conversations Janice and I have been having this season with our guests, you have just summed up what so many women across a multitude of industries have told us, right, about other women. And it's a really good way of explaining to people that wouldn't necessarily have thought about why that is. It's happened to them, so they understand that it happens, but they don't necessarily know why. So no, thank you. That's so helpful.
This made me think about The Queen's Gambit, this new show on Netflix.
Oh yeah, love it. I watched it. Yeah.
I binged it all within a week, unashamedly. And I thought, obviously, the character is fictional and she had a really sad upbringing, and probably it hints at mental illness in the family. However, I really liked how the character was portrayed to be the only female in international chess. And you see her growth actually from being I guess I don't think she was ever intimidated apart from by Berghoff, like the world champion. But you can see her kind of growing up with her adopted mother, you know, basically abusing drugs, going into alcoholism. You can see how she deals with relationships with men. And then it all just seems quite relevant to everything you were talking about just now. Like when you are the leading female character in your universe, how are you going to play it out? And I mean, I'm glad it had a happy ending.
Yeah.
But, you know, the middle 4 episodes, I think, particularly as a woman watching it, I was a bit like, I can see why she did that.
Oh, totally.
I can see why that was her knee-jerk reaction to men advancing on her taking advantage of men advancing on her. So that was just really, really interesting. And anyone who hasn't seen it, go watch it.
Yes, see it. It's great.
And I think, Neha, when we were looking at Anne's book, we were kind of like, oh my God, there are too many things we want to ask Anne about. How are we going to record an episode about this? Because it feels like it should be a conference. But one thing that we both pointed out very quickly was when you said perfection is male. Right, and then instantly I said to Neha, "Oh, but Ariana Grande says God is a woman," and you know, there's a lot of, I think, modern narratives trying to push back on that idea. And then we talked about, you know, in both of our cultures, in religion, there are female characters, there are female gods and saints, but they are always the partner of a male one. Yeah. And so yeah, I guess I just wanted to maybe dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm always talking about the deep subconscious programming that we've inherited from history, not what some young woman is saying. It's very, very different. We're never talking about the conscious modern world. We're talking about the insidious legacy of history. So the perfectionist male thing, let me describe how this works. So I say that, you know, the world was made by men for men to suit men. And you know, here is the thing. I mean, that is the case. We've inherited that from history. You know, no judgment. It's simply what is. But the way I explain this is to give you an analogy. Okay, so think about the world outside the home as the sea, and men are the saltwater fish. And they have been out there forever, doing whatever they want, power, authority, leadership, you name it. Women have been confined literally to the home or to some menial levels of the workplace, which, but let's just stick to the home analogy. So the women have been kept out of the world, out of the sea. They've been in the rivers. They've been in the freshwater. And this has gone on for many hundreds of years. And then suddenly, late 20th century, things change, and the women can now go out. You know, the freshwater fish are now let out into the sea. And they think, yes, this is the promised land. I'm here. I can finally have that career that I want. But as soon as they're there, they start to choke because they didn't evolve for salt water. And so they have a choice. Either they're just going to die or they have to quickly adapt. So they have to shut parts of themselves down, make things that weren't there originally to try and survive in that salt environment. So they are struggling because they're having to do all of that in addition to their, what they're actually achieving in life. Then, how does it look to the saltwater fish? Well, they're just going to look and say, well, you know what? That looks like a fish, and I'm a fish, and I'm fine. You should be fine too. What's the fuss about? They don't understand that the freshwater fish did not evolve for that environment. It's the saltwater fish are in the environment that completely suits them. It's their way. We have been expected to adapt. So all of the benchmarks, all of the standards, the definitions, the way of doing things, it's all the male way. It's not the way it has to be. And it isn't a way that fits everybody nicely. Nobody said, oh, let's adapt and let's change the salt content to make the freshwater fish more comfortable. They just said, this is what it's like, take it or leave it. So that is literally what has happened. We've inherited this system. And so, people might say, oh, it's not like that at all. But then I would say something to them like this. Okay, think about, for example, our political system with the two parties, the confrontational, the antagonistic, in each other's faces, all of this stuff. If women had evolved our political system, do you think it would be exactly the same? And I can guarantee the answer is no. So that tells you how different the male benchmark, the male default is to what would be naturally right for a woman. So this is what we're dealing with all the time, absolutely all the time. And it's there, the subtle subconscious levels are there. And then, of course, it's totally there on the surface as well in the double standard. And things like, for example, the book Invisible Women, where all of the data is analysed and how the women simply aren't taken into account. Male is default, male is perfection, female is the aberration. And this is what we're dealing with. And the understanding of the fact that we are stuck with this world, we could, in theory, we could totally evolve something which is new and perfect for women, but that's not going to happen because we have the legacy, we have the institutions, we have the way of doing things, we have the structures. They're all so entrenched and ingrained that every single shift is a real challenge to drag it out of that old energy and say, well, actually, male was the default, but there's a female default that's just as good. It's different. It has many other qualities which you aren't taking into account. What we should have is a beautiful meshing of both. But we don't have that. Women are playing catch up all the time. And this is where the not good enough comes from, because we are reading the default all the time, subconsciously. And our mind is thinking, oh my God, that's not me. I can never be that because I'm not male. I'm always going to be inadequate while the benchmark is male. And so that totally goes into I feel like an imposter because I am an imposter. I'm a man, I'm a woman succeeding in a man's world, you see. So, that's what I say to people. Women are imposters because they are women in a world designed for men. So they feel like imposters. So the thing, it's not about whether you have a religion which has a goddess as well as a god, or it's about the understanding that nearly all the main religions are patriarchal. And in the UK, we have a Christian heritage. And if you go back 400 years, you would really only have had people who are Christian and a few people who are Jewish. And that's really what was here. And in that mindset and all of that belief system, very patriarchal, and all of the authority is with the male. You had the male priest. A woman has to go to the priest to then talk to God. Women can't go directly to God. There's a lot of taboos around a woman's body being unclean, unspiritual. The male is close to God, the woman is dirty. And it's a whole other conversation. But just to say that with this religious heritage on top of everything else I've already told you about, that religious heritage gives an added dimension of a divine authority on top of everything else. So it just exacerbates the problem that's already there.
Yeah, and Neha, when we were talking about, again, you know, in a little Anne book club, we were talking about how in most Western languages, the female form of a word is always a derivative of the male form of the word.
Very true.
Even male and female, man and woman.
Yeah.
You know, like, and although I did point out in Chinese, actually, this does not exist. The words man and woman are two completely different words. There is no connection to them at all. So that, to me, from a language point of view, is very interesting. That in French, for example, why is the table a man? You know, and why is, you know, and more common examples, why do people refer to cars and ships as women? Like they don't have reproductive organs.
I know. This is again another conversation, but what you've said actually flags up something which is very, very relevant to what we're talking about, and that is, I'll just give you the what's a good example? Where there has been a word which there was a male version and a female version, for example, actor and actress, right? Then there is the trend, I don't know if that's the right word, for something, oh no, we're all actors. No actress, we're all actors. But that is really, really damaging, because on the surface, what we need is a neutral word. We don't have a neutral word. We have taken on the male word. So on the surface, okay, let's call ourselves all actors, but that is giving a message to the subconscious, I have to be male to do this, because we perceive it as a male word. It's not a neutral word. And every time that happens, it's exacerbating this, you are forbidden. You're not meant to be here. You're not good enough. You're not ticking the right boxes and the benchmark. So that's, you know, when people use like a general pronoun and just say he, and we all know how that drives us mad, because it's just it's awful.
At work, somebody wrote an email, not probably realizing that the ask was for a woman, but they said, he must be able to do X, Y, and Z. He must be responsible for this. He will do that. And it didn't really matter what the email was saying, to be honest, but the minute I saw that pronoun being used, it just set off, you know, a chain reaction in my head, and I texted a couple of girlfriends and I was like, who is this person? Like, what? But it happens. Anyway, that was my own personal little moment today.
Well, that's the thing, and this is the thing to understand. I've got a chapter on this as well, what I call the water torture. But these are little things, but and people might say, and I've had this, you know, you're making a fuss about nothing, for heaven's sake, it's nothing. But it's not nothing, because when you've had it 10 million flipping times, and every time the message is, we expect it to be a man. It should be a man. Male is perfect. Male is default. Oh, you're a woman. Oh, we're not as good. You can't measure up. So here's the thing. When you have little things, and like somebody using the wrong pronoun, or somebody assuming that you don't have the authority, you know, people would defer to my student because my student was a man, and think that he had the authority when I didn't, or would think that I was the secretary, or this kind of thing, just because I'm a woman. They made that knee-jerk assumption. And every time that happens, it's not a little thing, because it's one of like 10 million things. And it just adds up and up and up and up and up. And every time it happens, it's giving you that message, you're not good enough. You are not ticking the right boxes. We expect that a man should be in this position. You're forbidden from being here. And it just reinforces all of that negative messaging, which is what undermines us every single day. So it matters what pronoun is used. It matters, you know, that you need to assume that well, it could be this man or this woman in authority. Why don't I ask who is in charge? These things totally matter, because when you don't do that, when you assume the male first, you are undermining every single woman in the room.
So one of my favorite chapters in your book, and it really made me chuckle when I read the title, was talking about, fairy tales, cartoons, all of these things that we grew up with, which actually gave us such a gender bias from a young age.
I know.
Before we even knew the word gender, right? And
yes.
In particular, I grew up in Hong Kong, and therefore I grew up watching a lot of Japanese anime.
Oh, right.
And looking back now, I just don't even understand why we were allowed to watch them, because not just on a gender bias. Let me give you what my favorite one is called Sailor Moon, and Neha, I know you know about this too. So the story centers around a group of teenage girls. I feel like they must be 14, 15, would you say? So not
ish, yeah,
not children, but not adults.
Okay.
And they're just high school kids, and I don't even remember how it happened, but they chance upon this thing that lets them transform into, world-saving heroes. But what happens when they transform? Their whole body becomes this iridescent colored thing, and they have their nails painted, makeup done, super short skirts, and they have like 2-meter long legs. But they're teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And then they go around saving the world, looking pretty. And then, of course, the male lead character is this masked hero, and just the one guy, right? And they all, really fancy him and all of that. And that's just one of the many animes and cartoons I grew up watching, and don't even have to mention all the princesses in the classic fairy tales where it is always the damsel in distress, who, I guess, like in one of the ones where she falls asleep after getting her finger pricked, I kind of feel like that implied she was an idiot. Because it was foretold, wasn't it, that at a certain age, you will fall asleep, and then she still went and did it. And I kind of feel like, wait, hold on a minute. So you're basically saying she's a fool. She didn't listen. She didn't, pay any attention to the warning and got herself in trouble, and therefore has to be rescued. And I feel like that's just such a common narrative for us growing up and then we start looking for this man who would come save us. Right? Everyone's looking.
So you've totally, flagged up something which is very, very real. However, there's a reason why I use the fairy tale analogy. And not only have I got a fairy tale running right the way through my book, but I've also used fairy tale characters as my power archetypes. And there's a very, very good reason for this. And this is that if we start off believing that we are like pretty empowered and just need a bit of assertive body language, we are never going to solve the problem. We need to understand that on this deep level, we are still way back in the patriarchal programming, way back, exactly where all these fairy tales start. Because it's the life experience which programs us and creates our reactions, whether we completely shut down or, how whether we're going into a fight or a flight. It depends on, what kind of, traumas or abuses or how we've been treated as children. And these people, women fall into these various archetypes. And it's all starting in this disempowered place. And as you said, in the fairy tale, the heroine, that's another one of these words. I don't like it when women are called heroes. They're not, they are heroines because they are female, right? So the heroine, she starts off with her challenges, and then in the traditional fairy tale, she then, of course, ends up being rescued by Prince Charming and married happily ever after. But what I'm proposing is a different solution. So the solution is, well, when the heroine, instead of carrying on in this patriarchal model, if she instead reawakens her true power, her true female power, everything that patriarchy told her was forbidden and she wasn't allowed to use, and it's been forgotten, and she reawakens that, she then has magic. She has amazing power, and she doesn't need to be rescued anymore. So in my fairy tale that goes through my book, my little character, Grace, she starts off as just the heroine. She comes across, the challenges of the double standard of the patriarchy, but she ends up not being rescued. She ends up turning into the powerful sorceress who can just blast everything in sight, not to hurt them, but to just take them down to size and be in her power. And I don't see there's any problem with loving the traditional stories, loving the fairy tales. I totally love them. I always did. I still do. It's just like I love 60s cult television. Couldn't get anything more more sexist than that. But it is of its genre, and I just love it for what it is. The understanding is I don't have to buy into the energies of that. I can say, okay, so this environment I'm working in is giving me all these messages that my true power, my doing it the female way, is not allowed here. But you know what? I can actually ignore that. I can change that subconscious to support me and allow me to be truly in my power, not running on empty, not forceful with nothing underneath, but really creating that power foundation to then be the female version, of the politician or the leader or the scientist or the medic or whatever it might be. So that's us becoming the sorceress archetype from whatever heroine archetype we started out as. So it's all a beautiful picture, really, because understanding where we've come from and that we actually starting off there subconsciously, even modern women, even today, it's still there. When we understand where we've come from and what really needs to be changed within us to get our power back on that deep level, that's when we are going to actually change that undermining subconscious response so that we don't go into the fight or flight and we don't have the stress and we don't have the burnout. And that's when we can really be truly in our power, not just thinking we're in our power and yet being undermined every single day.
And I guess that brings me really nicely to the next thing that I wanted to ask you, which is,
okay,
if you, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, it's
yeah,
a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell your 20-something-year-old self, Dr. Anne, inside that point that you think you wish you'd known back then that you know now?
Oh, well, I wish I had known everything that I've discovered. I wish I'd realised that I was, in fact, running on zero power, probably negative power, and that everything I was feeling was not because there was anything wrong with me at all. It's simply because I had come so far. It's because I'd broken so many barriers and was going so far against my subconscious programming. So the way I think of, the way I get people to understand where the subconscious is, to think about your grandmother or maybe your great-grandmother, somebody who was alive at the beginning of the 20th century, and ask yourself the question, what I'm doing with my career, my status, my salary, my aspirations, my freedom, the relationship I have with my partner, would that have been considered normal and respectable for my grandmother, my great-grandmother? The answer is no, 100% of the time. And what you'll find is that your subconscious is going to be there with all of the programs, the benchmarks, the horizons of your grandmother or great-grandmother, or even earlier into history. So that is the mismatch. And my grandmothers, one of them was a kitchen maid in a big house in London, and the other one worked in was basically a mother, and she did some work in a fizzy drink factory. And and here am I, 2 generations later, Cambridge PhD in science. It's like light years away. You can see the mismatch is enormous. So what I wish, if I'd known what was really going on under the surface, and I could say, I'm having this awful reaction, but you know what? You're actually getting the sign, the signal from your subconscious that you are going to be put to death for doing this, for breaking so many rules. That's why you feel so awful. That would have made a big difference. But that being said, I have a spiritual view of life, very much so. And I believe that I was meant to go through that. And I was meant to have the burnout, to make the discoveries, because I'm quite unusual in that I entered this sort of holistic world with a very scientific brain. So as opposed to just, helping people and healing people one by one, I was always looking for the big picture. I was always looking for the pattern, and you're both technical minded women. So, when there's a pattern, there's a common root. And when there's a common root, there's a solution. And that was always kind of there. So I think that, in fact, my path has been absolutely perfect. And I was meant to go through that. I was meant to spend 20 years analysing all this so that I could now share this knowledge, so that the next generation of women don't have to go through all of the struggles. And it is a struggle that, me and so many other women have gone through, because we should have the right to do what we want, achieve, shine, succeed in any career that we want without being undermined. And this is basically my mission to enable that. I had it very hard, 10 years of illness as a result of that burnout. But if I can prevent other women going through that, then it was worth it.
It's a complete sidebar question, but it came to me as you were talking. Do you ever talk to or mentor or even coach men, or do you only coach women, just out of interest?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. So I've worked with lots of men, because initially I started out just as a transformational healer. And I started off on the angle of whatever traumas you've been through life. It's not a question of surviving or even thriving. Use the trauma, use the really big life challenge to catapult yourself forward. That's why I call myself a power alchemist, because it's the alchemy, the lead into gold, the darkness into light. I was never satisfied with just surviving. And, I've also had the personal tragedy of my daughter died when she was just 7 years old, very suddenly in her sleep. And you can imagine that shattered the whole world. But, it was, so many people were saying, your life is over, Anne, because you've lost your child. But I was only 45 when she passed away. And even in the worst days, it was, no, I'm not going to let this terrible thing ruin my life. I'm going to use it. I'm going to get through it. I'm going to use it and create something amazing that makes my suffering worthwhile. That's the attitude that, it's so important. I can't emphasize it. It's so important to have that attitude to life. And I've kind of got a little bit off track here, but how that catapulted me into, instead of I want to help women overcome this, to I want to change the whole world so that all women, it totally magnified my mission. But to answer your question, I worked with a lot of men while I was simply doing that transforming the life experience. And it was only over the years that the pattern began to fall into place. And I specialized, and then I saw the big picture. And a lot more women come for help than men anyway. It's just the way it is. But I've certainly worked with a lot of men, which leads me to the next thing, really, which is that you can't just empower the women without empowering the men as well, because we have the same operating system, and men totally have their problems. Okay, that the patriarchy has given them the advantage, but the more that women come up, we are changing the relative limits in the power. And this triggers the male operating system, because traditionally, historically, men would have defined their value by the fact that they're the breadwinner, by the fact that they were maybe controlling women in their life, and obviously in some cases oppressing or being violent. Obviously, that's thankfully a minority. But the way that in the operating system, a man's value is defined, it's all relative to the women in his life. So when women get more powerful, more independent, and start earning more, that can trigger a man to start saying, you're not good enough, you failed, you're not a real man, because their benchmark is wrong too. So, in fact, my next book is for men, which I'm planning out at the moment, because we have to do both sides of the coin. It's not about, yes, I'm totally a feminist in the rights of women, but it's not about destroying men, not at all. What we need is to have empowered, enlightened men and women, where the power is flowing in a how to describe it, from the basis of love and responsibility and the good of everybody, not forcefully, I can stamp on you just because I'm stronger and take your land or whatever it used to be. So proper enlightened power, the male version and the female version in perfect balance. That is what we need. That's what the whole world needs. And at the moment, we have women not empowered because we're still running on empty and all these problems flag up. And there are so many examples in the world of the unenlightened version of male power. I don't need to mention any names, and you can immediately think of a large number of people. All of that is wrong. We need to, change this operating system so the men, instead of needing to be forceful, can be, enlightened leaders and bring everybody up instead of stamping people down, and have that balance, and that they're not threatened when their wife earns more than them, because they're no longer, their subconscious isn't defining their value by how much they are outshining the women. So it all fits together, but there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I was going to mention actually that we'll put links to your book in our show notes, and also we'll show a picture of it, because I think it's really worth everybody reading it. And of course, your next book as well. I'll be quite interested to read that. And what I found really, really good about the book we received from you is you've got all these exercises for people to do to really start making changes. Yeah. So on that note, I would actually like to invite you and to give our listeners 3 actionable tips that they can, after listening to this episode, go away, think about it, and start changing things.
Right, definitely. Okay, so the first thing is to have that awareness of what's really going on in your subconscious mind. Understand that it is on a completely different page. It has no idea that you are living in the 21st century and you have the right to do whatever you want and achieve and shine. And it doesn't know that. It doesn't know that. It is giving you messages of danger that are undermining you every single day. It's doing it because its information is wrong. And when you understand that, that is, that's game changing in itself. Because when you're still going to feel the reaction, but when you can say to yourself, oh yes, what did Anne say? Yes, my subconscious thinks I'm going to be burnt at the stake for chairing this meeting. Well, how ridiculous is that? I can park those feelings to some extent and just get on with it. So that, it doesn't solve the problem, but that awareness is the first step to you literally taking back your power from that subconscious operating system. So the second step is, once you know that, you can then start to throw out all the conclusions you made about yourself because you made them on misinformation. So if you are saying, I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with my character, I'm too reserved, I'm too quiet, I'm pathetic because I can't speak up in this meeting, I'm an imposter, I'm going to be discovered. All of that, just take it and just put it in the bin, right? Because it's all based on this misunderstanding. That's all there because your subconscious thinks you should be this demure, quiet, reserved, in the background little woman serving the tea. It really does. So every time you then start to judge yourself and beat yourself up and push yourself till you're about to drop and say you're not good enough, stop yourself and actually give yourself some acknowledgement, because you would not be feeling those things if you had not achieved a great deal to get where you are, because it's the mismatch. It's how far you have pulled away from the subconscious programming that makes you feel that way, not that you're not good enough. So in fact, the worse you feel, the more amazing you are. That's the bottom line. That's the truth, right? So that the third thing is the key. This is the pulling back your power. And this is how you can bring your subconscious out of that fight or flight, and you can do it in the moment. So you are in that meeting, you've been interrupted, that panic comes in, you need to say something, you can't get the ball back, you begin to feel useless. All of that, you can then take this action, and you can bring your subconscious out, your stress will go down, your confidence will go up, and you literally change the power dynamic so that not only you feel it, but other people feel it as well. And I've actually got a free training online that listeners can go to and listen to the training, and I talk you through it, and you can really, really experience it. So for that, if you go to, it's thesecretsorceress.com, there's all my links are there, but right at the top you'll find the free training, and that teaches you how to pull back your power and switch your subconscious out of that fight or flight. So it is absolutely key. And because for years I'd done the belief work, changing my understandings, all of this, but that feeling was not going. I thought, what am I missing? What am I missing? And then one day I just did it. I just grabbed my power and I pulled it in, and it just changed everything. I suddenly felt confident and relaxed, being myself, speaking up, participating, feeling like an equal, basically feeling like an equal. And I never had before in my whole life. And this is the key to do that. And so you can get that completely free. Just I want all women to know how to do this, basically. So thesecretsorceress.com, you will find the free training. So these are my 3 things: the awareness, the put those conclusions in the bin and stop pushing yourself, and learn to pull back your power. And just those things will change your life. Trust me.
So we're going to wrap up with the question that we've asked all of our guests this season. And it's quite simple, really. If you were to come back in another life, if there were to be one, what gender would you come back as, and why?
Female. Without a doubt. I am very female. I'm feminine. I have no desire to be male. I mean, I love men. The people I love most in the world, apart from my mother, they're all men, right? But I'm very female. And it's not about abandoning being female. It's about, let's change things so that we can really enjoy being female with freedom. The women in the past have suffered so much all over the world in a million different ways, haven't they? And finally, here, this time, this country, certainly the Western world particularly, we have so much opportunity on the surface, but we're not quite there yet because we're still being undermined by the legacy. So what I say is, there is work to be done. There is power to be pulled back. There's understanding. There's, changing those defaults and, getting that salt content down so the freshwater fish can thrive instead of having to adapt all the time. There's lots of work to be done, and let's do it.
You've been listening to Culturally Speaking with music by Kevin MacLeod. Please rate and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on.
Get in touch with us at Culturally Speaking Podcast on Instagram. You'll find all the details in our show notes. Tune in next week for more culture. Until then, stay cultured.